We shift our focus to this story now. Newly appointed MMC for Group Corporate and Shared Services, Thembiso Zungu, has found himself at the center of a Hawks extortion investigation dating back to 2018. Zungu, who was appointed MMC on the 7th of August, reportedly received payments from contractor CityDev Construction while the contractor was building houses in Lehigh, Johannesburg. The fees were reportedly facilitation or protection fees paid at the time when Zungu was chairman of the Vlakfontein Business Forum. Now, allegations of involvement in the stoppage of a 135 million school refurbishment project at Inkululeko Yesizwe Construction have also surfaced. The MMC has refuted all allegations of extortion, stating that he was appointed as a social facilitator by the contractor at Lehigh and also stepped down as chair of the Business Forum when he was elected as ANC councillor in 2019. Joining us to discuss the broader issue of difficulties faced by contractors in construction due to never-ending stoppages as a result of groupings that demand subcontracting roles or fees for protection is Professor Alex van der Heever, the chairperson of Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at Wits University. Professor, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, in as much as the MMC has not been charged, a decision is yet to be taken on whether to prosecute following the Hawks investigation. This particular story, though, has necessitated a broader conversation yet again on the challenges faced within construction, given the investment infrastructure has been placed at the top of our economic growth agenda. We've heard from the President on numerous occasions that South Africa must look like a construction site now for the next couple of years, and that means this industry needs a bit more support. What do you make of this construction mafia phenomena in general that continues to persist despite several interventions?
Well, it appears to have official sanction. And this is the concern, is that in fact the reason why it persists is that in fact it is not rooted out and not stopped. And when we see an individual like this who's also appointed into a position of official authority within the council, it's concerning again, because it suggests that this is now a sort of almost official policy of parts of government to allow for sort of inappropriate interference in the in investment projects.
Mm-hmm.
So it is.
Professor, pardon me for interjecting there. Please pardon me for a moment. I believe that General Shadrack Sibiya, who's currently in court applying to have his suspension reversed, is currently addressing the media. I just want to pause our conversation there. We'll continue in just a bit. We continue our conversation here with Professor van der Heever on broader issues related to construction and construction mafias. We've seen a lot of work stoppages, Professor. You were stating there just before we quickly went to General Shadrack Sibiya's interview that perhaps what we're seeing here, why it continues to persist, is because somehow there's some sort of sanctioning of this type of conduct. I don't know from which quarter, but you believe that there is some sort of endorsement of the conduct, perhaps of ensuring that there's a 30% figure or subcontracting within a specific community. There's also the endorsement in some quarters of some sort of a social facilitator when a contractor is brought into certain communities.
Yes, and the other issue is that there is kickbacks clearly potentially being paid as well. So all of this suggests corruption, very, very problematic corruption that has official sanction, because none of this is appropriate at all. The idea of any kind of project along these lines is that you have a very clear and transparent tendering process, and you have a very clear award winner who is then properly supervised until completion of the project. So what we have in this instance is essentially strongmen potentially, sometimes being placed into official positions as well as operating as intermediaries, and they have no role in this in such projects at all. Mm-hmm. And they drive up the cost of the projects and they drive down the performance. And they also change who's actually doing what, which impacts on whether or not, the idea of turning South Africa into a construction site isn't the intention to leave South Africa as a construction site. Stuff should still be being built. Yeah. But it's not being built.
Because our understanding is that we're going to need infrastructure to drive economic growth in the country. Now, given its importance right now in the broader program of economic rejuvenation or revitalization of our economy, could perhaps when we look at this whole construction mafia phenomena, could perhaps the difficulty arise from the fact that the constraints, or at least that this construction mafia phenomena is multi-layered. There's an element of socio-economic challenges that also fuel this criminality, in that there would be legitimate calls from people in communities to perhaps be hired as general workers in those communities. They have a leader who must facilitate those conversations with the contractors, and then somewhere along the way, criminal elements hijacked these programs. But all of this being rooted in the social ills that most communities are plagued by.
So I would rather say that there are predatory actors who take advantage of the social ills in order to enrich themselves. And these construction projects are naturally labor intensive. They draw in both skilled and unskilled labor from all quarters. So what you want is to have these projects driven at scale, not stopped. So they're highly redistributional from an income perspective if they are allowed to proceed. But what one is seeing with this kind of interference is that people are basically channeling public resources into private pockets. So it's not developing communities. It's not actually redistributional at the end of the day. It stops projects and is largely just a way of transferring tax-funded sources of income into private sources of revenue, which can end up in Lamborghinis and properties on Clifton Beach. That's not redistribution. That's not assisting the development of poor communities. So the issue is that a properly run program that is officially sanctioned, that is transparent, that's clear, has very logical objectives, will achieve all of the redistribution requirements and social upliftment that's necessary. But this is not doing it. This is basically channeling resources to private interests.
Now, to borrow from the News 24 article on the MMC, there's a part where the contractor City Dev CEO said in his affidavit that he deposed to, he said that they were now at a point where they were struggling with cash flow, given the constant demands for the so-called facilitation fees, and also the demand to give portions of that contract to certain contractors who would become subcontractors, but in some instances they wouldn't be properly qualified to actually do the job in that respect. When you see such, could we possibly be seeing a situation where constantly when we report on some contractors that abandon projects, that don't finish the projects, that have had now the cost to build having been driven up maybe by 100%, could there be a backstory here where they were harassed and they were being extorted constantly?
Yes, so the extortion itself becomes a problem. So once it becomes officially sanctioned, a normal contractor is being compelled to pay bribes in order to continue to function. So that's problematic. Now, just note that in terms of subcontractors should be noted. They should be part of the original tender if they are to be incorporated. So you can't just willy-nilly incorporate new subcontractors as the contract is now being entered into. And if that's what's happening, then that is basically irregular and is fraudulent. Potentially, and essentially you've got corruption operating in the whole supply chain process, potentially. So those are things that are very problematic.
Professor, what is your view?
The reason why a lot of contracts end up stopping with this type of behavior is that large upfront fees are also demanded, largely channeled into private pockets, and then the money is basically taken away and the projects stop. That's why you have big holes in the ground and nothing gets completed. When you see that, you know that there's this kind of behavior behind it.
It's honestly quite worrying. Professor, what do you make, though, of just this concept of social facilitators?
It's quite clearly corruption. There's no role for people like that. If a government is contracting with somebody, it must be upfront. It must be very clear and transparent. So this introduces a degree of discretion into the process, which shouldn't be there. So the idea that you allow gatekeepers to start charging fees for access to further payments on contracts that have been approved is basically a shakedown. And you should not be creating shakedown opportunities in the procurement process.
But what of community leaders that say this is a legitimate position that one can hold and almost serves as a bridge between the community, perhaps those who would love to be given jobs as general workers? It serves as that bridge between the community members and the contractor who wouldn't be from that area in certain instances. So what of those who defend this kind of a role of a social facilitator to ensure that they at least least organize members of communities who are unemployed and would be willing to become general workers, or to perhaps collate all the data to find out the skill sets that some of them have to then present to the contractor?
So this shouldn't go to the contractor. To the extent that there is any community involvement, it should happen at the time of the bidding process itself, or part of, designed into the project. It should not be part of something that is done down the line when the contracts have been awarded. So the problem with what appears to be happening in these cases is that so-called social facilitators can become gatekeepers to the ongoing payments, particularly if they've got relationships into the municipalities or into the provincial government. So what is actually happening there is that they're basically just shaking down the contractors until they get what they want. And it's not a genuine facilitation for community involvement. It's a shakedown. And it increases the cost of the project, reduces its results and performance. And it should, that's not the time anything should happen. Contractors must carry on with the contract they've got in terms of the contract, and that's how contracts are run. If there's any kind of social development that needs to occur, that must be part of the policy framework that's set up prior to the bidding process. In other words, it's built in to the way in which the tenders are actually structured. And there should be no one who stands in a gatekeeping position in relation to any part of the bidding process. People must be able to freely bid and carry on. But when they've got a contract, they must be able to proceed, and nobody should be interfering with that, including being supported from the municipality. And that's the reason why Johannesburg's in the state it's in, and many municipalities are. It is this type of improper conduct, and it's the reason why the Auditor General is saying everything is irregular in all of the procurement. So that's the consequence of having this kind of murky so-called intermediation. And it's a veneer for theft. It is not actually a genuine attempt to uplift communities.
What a conundrum. Professor, we'll most certainly be reaching out to the MMC for group shared services. That's Thembiso Zungu, because he once held that position of social facilitator that you say is perhaps a veneer here for theft. To just get his views on this specific matter pertaining to his role there as social facilitator in Lahai. But thank you very much for your time. That's Professor Alex van der